said they have.
Do we have enough people today?
They wouldn't serve until.
Is that right?
Yeah.
How are you doing? It's good to see you.
Up and running. Everything is good?
Thank you guys all for coming today. I'm Sam Blatt. I'm the Economic Development Manager for the City of North Miami. And you are all attending the Mayor's first quarter luncheon of 2019. And the topic is Inclusive Prosperity, Know Me in Today's Creative Economy. We have a really exciting luncheon, an awesome keynote speaker. Many of you are probably very familiar with Dr. Richard Florida. He's going to give us a great talk on how North Miami can address challenges and opportunities that the cities face in the coming years. But before we do that, I just wanted to make a few remarks. Like I said, this is our 16th luncheon. We've had over 1,500 people attend these luncheons over the past 4 years. And this was the mayor's initiative, his brainchild, to have some resources for our small businesses. I want to thank the North Miami CRA, the Community Redevelopment Agency. They're the ones who are sponsoring this luncheon, so we all get a free meal today from the North Miami CRA. More importantly, we're actually going to at first charge for this because we're going to do a scholarship donation to the Miami Urban Future Initiative. However, the CRA has also generously agreed to donate $5,000 to FIU's Miami Urban Future Initiative. So thank you very much to the CRA. I want to most importantly thank our North Miami small business owners. I know there's several of you in the room today. Could you raise your hand if you're a North Miami business owner in the room? All right, awesome. So, yes. The luncheons are for the small business owners. You know, that's what they were originally started for, and we're really happy to have so many of you guys here in the room. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and invite up the man of the hour, the man who needs no introduction, the one who started these luncheons, North Miami's Mayor, Dr. Smith Joseph.
Good afternoon, everyone. At the inception of my campaigns before I became mayor, one of the key issues that I ran my campaign on is actually this: to make sure that North Miami come up with some type of activities that would provide a forum that would provide opportunities to small businesses to really flourish. And the only way we can flourish as a small business is with information. A lot of times we keep doing the same thing and our businesses are not going anywhere, and we keep wondering why. And in this world of technology where everything is taking off, we are actually undergoing what you call a transportation revolution, I should say. That's why I made sure that we have Ms. Bouclé here. She's the director of the TPO, Transportation Planning Organization, which used to be known as the MPO. And I serve there as a member as well. I don't see the other members of the council to ask them to stand up. They must be eating somewhere else or working, I hope. Yeah, so yes, Sam hit it right on the nail when he mentioned CRA and the small businesses. The small businesses, you know that the CRA is there for you. That's one of the reasons when I first got elected, our CRA was pretty much dead up on arrival. It was about to be knocked out by the Miami-Dade County. Yeah, as you know, CRA, Community Redevelopment Agency, is an agreement between municipalities and the county. I don't want to give you wrong numbers, but I think in the past 4 years that I have been a mayor, the CRA probably gave out, I would say, close to $3 or $4 million to small businesses. We help them transplant themselves from other places to North Miami, because our dreams for North Miami is to see us develop and take opportunities so that we can become the hub, one of the hubs of transportation. As you know, the train is coming, the passenger train is coming through Miami-Dade County, and we want North Miami to be one of the cities that will acquire one of the train stations. Right, Ms. Bouclé? Thank you very much. And also, a big thank you to Dr. Florida for really accepting the invitation to be here today. We know you're a very busy man. Thank you very much for coming. Dr. Richard Florida is one of the world's leading urbanists in the country. He is a researcher and professor serving as university professor at University of Toronto School of Cities and Rotman School of Management, and a distinguished fellow at NYU and Florida International University. He is a writer and journalist, having penned several global bestsellers, including the award-winning The Rise of the Creative Class. In his most recent book, The New Urban Crisis, published in April 2017, he serves as senior editor for The Atlantic, where he co-founded and serves as editor-at-large for City Lab. So he's an entrepreneur and founder of the Creative Class Group, which works closely with companies and governments worldwide. Without any further ado, we will ask Dr. Florida to please come to the podium, and I will ask you to please receive them with a big round of applause. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Sam. Thanks especially to the CRA and all of you for inviting me here and making that wonderful donation to our Miami Urban Future Initiative. And we've been at this now for about 5 or 6 years. When the Emerge conference was started, at the very first one, I gave a speech to a group of your colleagues, Mayor, from the Caribbean and Latin America, and in the audience was Mark Rosenberg, the president at FIU. And he said the kindest thing to me afterward. He said he enjoyed my remarks, but we should do something together about these issues of cities and city growth, and that's when the idea was born. And with the generous support of the Knight Foundation several years ago, we were able to expand that initiative and to sustain it. So this is part of our effort. You know, there's a booth outside. You'll see our reports. We do 5 or 6 reports a year. That's a lot of work, and it's a great team, and we do them on this greater Miami region, which is Miami-Dade County, Fort Lauderdale and Broward County, and Palm Beach. And I'm going to talk more about, everything I'll say today comes from that initiative, and I do serve as a distinguished fellow at FIU. And then we have some new reports coming this year, which I think are very much on this theme that the mayor has brought us together about inclusion and equity. They're going to be the next steps, and those reports will be issued in the coming months, and hopefully you'll all tune in. And Pittsburgh at the time was going through rampant and extensive deindustrialization. The city lost 150,000 jobs in just a few-year period when its steel mills closed, and not just its steel mills, Heinz Ketchup and all the food processing, Pittsburgh Plate Glass, Pittsburgh Paints, Westinghouse Electric. This was kind of a, if you think about a Silicon Valley of its day with all these high-tech enterprises anchored by great universities, Pittsburgh, which population almost hit 1 million in its heyday, saw its population decline from 950-some thousand all the way down to its current population of about 330,000. So it was dealt a body blow. And what we were trying to do in Pittsburgh was to figure out how to make that city grow again. And what we realized at the time is even though the manufacturing plants had shuttered, there were 2 great universities, Carnegie Mellon and the University of Pittsburgh, which anchored the community and were producing research and generating startup companies. By the way, I just saw this report yesterday. Carnegie Mellon University generates more startup companies per capita or per research dollar than any other university in the United States, including MIT and Stanford, on a per capita or per research dollar basis. We were attracting great talented people from all over the world, but those people were leaving. They were leaving to move to Austin, Texas, or Seattle, Washington, or San Francisco, or New York. They were leaving to go to other places. And so at the time, that's when I got the idea that I would write this book that the mayor so kindly mentioned called The Rise of the Creative Class. And that book was really about the basic idea that it's not just big corporations that drive economic growth and development, that it's not just big investments that drive economic. That's what we believed. That's what my field believed, that if you want, and the HQ2 thing really is kind of a back to the past. If you wanted to grow your city, if you just had big companies and they were providing good jobs, the people would come to them. But what we were finding in Pittsburgh is that wasn't the case. Even when young people at Carnegie Mellon had job offers, they were rejecting those job offers to go to places that they really wanted to live in, that were more exciting, that had more young people, that had more racial and ethnic diversity, places that had a large gay and lesbian community. All things that seemed really strange to me at the time. So that's why I undertook to write this book, which became titled The Rise of the Creative Class. And the argument in that book was that it was people, all of us, people like us, small business people, entrepreneurs, techies, people with strange ideas, people themselves, just individual talented people, that we were the stuff of economic development. And Pittsburgh at the time was investing billions of dollars in convention centers and stadiums and trying to lure big companies. And the former mayor of Pittsburgh, who's a great friend of mine, Tom Murphy, said, when you came to City Hall and you told us, Richard, that what was going to drive economic development was a closer partnership with the university and more technology transfer and launching startup businesses and this creative class, we thought you were nuts. We thought you were insane. But as it turns out, that's what renewed Pittsburgh. If you look at Pittsburgh today, and the mayor of Pittsburgh is a great friend of mine, a guy named Bill Peduto, how is Pittsburgh rebuilt? Around robotics. We used to see the robots at Carnegie Mellon. They used to be rolling around the hallways, these robots. What's that thing? We used to see self-driving tanks for the Department of Defense. Self-driving what? Who? Now Pittsburgh is the leading center for self-driving cars in the world. When I got there, my colleagues said, we're going to have computing any place, anytime, anywhere. And I thought they were from Mars. But it's all come true. We have these things in our house that we can talk to and turn our lights and the radios on and off. So that's the stuff that rebuilt Pittsburgh. And what I began to see is that we were going through a very big economic revolution. And that's really the first point I want to make. That we were shifting from the older industrial economy and industrial system that I was born into, dad a blue-collar worker, mom taking ads and then a homemaker, living in a small suburban home, working-class home in New Jersey, that we were moving to a new kind of economy. For all of human history before us, if you wanted to create wealth, we got it either from having abundant storehouses of raw materials or by building giant factory complexes that harnessed the physical labor of people like my dad. It was raw material and strengths and backs and brawn. And if you're an economist, you know this because the factors of production they teach you about are three: land, labor, and capital. But about the time I was getting my PhD and about the time I was moving into Pittsburgh, the economy was changing. Yes, deindustrialization was happening. Yes, our economy was losing its manufacturing might. Yes, the world was becoming more global and we had new competitors like China. But something even more basic was going on. We were shifting from an older kind of industrial economy to a new kind of economy for the first time in human history that is powered not by our physical strength and our physical labor, but where the mind has become the means of production. And that's what I called a creative economy. You see, what makes this economy truly new is not just the knowledge we require in schools or the information that we create or the technologies that we build. It's actually this thing that we have as human beings. 5% of Americans, think about this, are engaged in factory work. The creative class is the growth class of our time, and it's the generator of wealth and innovation and economic might. Across the United States, a third of us, here in South Florida, Greater Miami, that tri-county area, more than 1 million members of our workforce participate in the creative class, about the 8th largest total in the United States, and another 1.3 million have a bachelor's degree or an advanced degree. One other critical fact, which this room reflects. Foreign-born people, immigrants like my grandparents, but new immigrants to this part of the world, are incredibly important to our region's innovation economy, its knowledge economy, and its creative class. When we think about immigration in South Florida sometimes, or when some of our peers think about immigration in South Florida, they tend to think about low-skill immigration. Immigrants like my grandparents with 0 formal education, who came from southern Italy and took up jobs in manufacturing or construction to make life better for their families. We certainly have that, and probably to a greater extent than most of the United States. Lower-skilled, less educated people coming here for opportunity for themselves and their families. But here's the rub. We have the second largest percentage of high-skill, highly educated, creative class immigrants in the country. Our shares, foreign-born, thank you, and this people have to know. There is only one region of the country where immigrants, foreign-born people, people not born in this country, have a higher share of people with a bachelor's degree, a higher share of people with an advanced degree, or a higher share of people who are members of this creative class, knowledge workers in science, technology, business, law, the professions, and the arts. Do you know what region that is? The Silicon Valley of California, the San Jose metropolitan area, the area that is home to Google and Intel and Genentech and all of the companies that we associate with the high-tech boom. 30 to 50% of those companies started in Silicon Valley were started by a person who wasn't born in the United States. We are number 2. We are the second region, a metropolitan region in this country in terms of the share of high-skilled immigrants that are members of our highly educated group and of our creative class. And we have to do more with that. Well, look, that's the good news. And the good news is that not only has the creative economy grown and propelled growth in our country and really propelled the United States to unparalleled positions of dominance in the world economy, but the creative economy is organized more and more around cities and city regions. And this is real. If the creative economic revolution is the economic driver of our time, the organizing unit of our new knowledge economy and our creative economy is the city itself. Who would imagine that Newark could have competed for an Amazon headquarters? We're now seeing gentrification in downtown Newark. Who would have imagined that my wife's hometown of Detroit would be a gleaming spot of innovation and entrepreneurship and startup and the movement of people downtown, where there are 2 brand new boutique hotels? Who would have thought that Pittsburgh, 20 years ago, would come back and be a center where young people are moving? The rebirth at downtown Los Angeles, completely abandoned when I was a boy, now building giant condo towers, never mind, not far south from here. And not just in South Beach, but what is happening on the shores of the bay in Miami. No one, if I had said this 20 years ago, they would have said I was insane, a heretic, and from the moon. But it's happened in a way that none of us could have predicted. And it's happened mainly since the year 2000. This new urban revival and new urban crisis has happened mainly since the year 2000. And it's happened in a way no one could have predicted. The top 10% of income earners have moved back to cities. The bottom 10% of income earners have been pushed out of cities. The white, the affluent, and the educated have come back to urban areas, pushing out the less educated, the less advantaged, the non-white, and the minority. They call this a great inversion. Where we once saw the flight of the affluent and the educated to the suburbs, we're now seeing a new kind of flight of the educated and the affluent back to the urban center. What's driving that? One, the cities have the best jobs. Our knowledge jobs, our highly paid jobs, are increasingly concentrated in urban centers. Our cities have good transit, many of them. There's a way to get people. Dan Gilbert in Detroit, when asked why he moved his companies from the outlying fringe of Detroit back to the downtown, he said because there was a transport infrastructure and people could get to work. Highways and transit. Amenities. People want the kinds of amenities that are in urban centers. They want to be able to walk out for dinner and walk out and take their kids to a park. They want to reduce their commute times. For all of these reasons, we've seen this revival and inversion. So that's what the book is about. We know that now kids in low-income neighborhoods are locked into lives of perpetual disadvantage. When I was a boy, 75% of Americans were members of the middle class and lived in a middle-class neighborhood. Now less than a third of us do. That is a striking statistic. As we have fractured into areas of high advantage that a few of us can occupy and much larger spans of economic decay and disadvantage, in 205 of 229 metropolitan areas that we can collect data on, the middle class in America and the middle class neighborhoods have declined. So we are dealing with the decay of the whole middle of our economy and the whole middle of our society as we fragment into small enclaves. And it's very complicated. It's not just that they're all in the city and the poverty. It's true that some in the city and some in the suburbs, but it's actually a patchwork of advantage, some of which goes into certain urban neighborhoods surrounded by large spans of disadvantage. Some of it, the richest neighborhoods in America are still suburban, but they're surrounded by poverty areas. We're getting to look less like America and more like a third world country. Anyway, what can we do? And that's why I'm really here. What can you do? What can we do? And that's what the book tries to write a little bit of a manifesto for. That's why I was so honored and feel privileged to be able to speak with you here today. That's what my work with cities. So just so you know, I'm working with cities all across this country to try to spread this message and gospel. And the reason is, 20 or 30 years ago, cities heard the message and gospel about innovation and entrepreneurship and startups and the creative class, and they did it. Cities like Miami and Milwaukee and Minneapolis and Pittsburgh and Detroit really rebuilt their economy based on research and ideas people like I had about building clusters, attracting talent, developing startup ecosystems. This has become the bread and butter stuff of economic development. And you see it. I see it in communities I travel to. But none of those mayors and none of those economic developers and none of those citizens and stakeholders, none of us, not me nor anyone else, really thought about the way doing that might contribute to and exacerbate the pulling apart we've seen. So what I do now is work with cities and mayors all across this country to try to change the narrative and change the dialogue and change the conversation to one that we're talking about today. How can we be both better growing and more innovative and more entrepreneurial and more equitable and inclusive? And by the way, those things go together. It's not like if you're equitable, you have to be poor and sacrifice growth, and if you're growing, you have to be unequal. The two go together. We can actually grow in ways that are more inclusive, we can grow in ways that are more equitable, and we can grow in ways that lift all boats. And what has me terrified in America today is that those things seem to be coming apart. That either in America today you have to be pro-growth and pro-innovation, or pro-equity and pro-redistribution, when in actually they go together. And we can build an incredibly dynamic and a better society if we figure that one out. So here's the things that we have to do. And they're actually quite simple. The first thing we have to realize is that we have to get with the business of building more housing. We're doing a decent job of building more housing here. Our next report, by the way, is on housing and on affordable housing in Greater Miami. It should be out this month. But we're building too much of the wrong kind of housing. We're building too much of the kinds of housing that most of us in this room can't afford. Most of us in this room can't afford. Never mind the folks who aren't in this room. We're building too much of the housing targeted at the 0.0001%. Now that helped us a little because last time the housing market fell apart, we had to rent that stuff out, and that's what fueled the return of a lot of people into the urban center. But we're building too much of the wrong kind of housing, and we've got to get back to building affordable housing. Now, that's a hard, me and Sam talked about, that's a hard nut to crack. It's a tough one, but we can do it. One thing we can do, especially in a community like this, is have developers help us. In New York, we have a rental apartment, because I'm a distinguished fellow at NYU. And in our rental apartment, built as a new build by Extel, a very big development company, 20% of the units in that building are for less advantaged working people. The penthouses in that building probably go for $10 million. The regular apartments probably go for $1 million. We're spending a pretty good chunk of money on rent because we can afford it. It's offset by the salary. But other people live in that building for $400 and $500 a month. And there's no poor door. There's no separate door. They get to use the lobby and the gym. And I, you know, I have guilt. And it makes me feel a little bit better that I get to pay a little bit higher rent. I'm paying a little bit higher rent. People are paying a little bit higher condominium prices so that people in our building can have affordable housing. There's other ways to do it. We can do it by providing public subsidies. We can use housing vouchers, which our federal government has tried to cut, but other communities, California now, my good friend Gavin Newsom is the governor. California now is saying, you know, we're going to spur construction and we're going to provide demand-side assistance. So we have to do that. Look, the mayor said this. This region's got to make an investment in transit. And what we're doing now is a step in the right direction, but we got to put our foot on the gas. Enough's enough. Transit is going to be better for growth, and it's going to be better for equity. The better the transit we have, you know, I can just tell you Toronto, which has a pretty good transit system, the people who work in hospitality and tourism, it's probably the same here, probably not quite as bad yet, are commuting 1 to 2 hours each way. So it's not only inequity. How can you run a hospitality and tourism economy, the rates of turnover, the rates of employee churn, the rates of fall off, the rates of disgruntlement, the rates of exhaustion? You can't run an economy when people are enduring that kind of commute and doing 2 or 3 jobs just to make ends meet. When we do the numbers, folks, the creative class in Miami takes home about 75 to 80 grand each, and when you take out the money they spend for housing, they probably have 50 grand left over to spend on life's necessities. 2 million Miamis work in the service class. They're the people who run our tourism and hospitality economy. They're the people who are feeding us our lunch today. They're the people who wait on us in retail stores, who take care of us in hotels and when we go to the beach and set up our beach chairs for us, take care of our aging parents, provide personal care to us, daycare to our children. Those people make 30 grand a year. And when you take out the amount they spend for housing, it's like 10 grand left over, or less. How do you make ends meet on 10 or 12 or 15 grand a year? It's unfathomable. So the most important thing we have to do as a community, and I think it's incumbent upon us here, is we've got to lift the boats of that service class. We in Las Vegas are the 2 metropolitan regions that are most dependent on this class of workers, the service class. 50%, half of our workforce. The creative class is about 1/3, the working class is a little less than 20%. Half of our workforce are made up of service workers. Retail workers, office workers, clerical workers, food prep workers, food service workers, personal care workers, physical therapy workers, you can go down the list. Fastest growing job categories run our tourism and hospitality economy. We have to make those jobs better. There's just no way around it. That's the only way we're going to rebuild our middle class. And that's something we as a region have to commit to. And let me tell you how we can do it. My dad was a pretty smart guy. And when we would visit the factory he worked in, he'd make 2 very important points to an 11, 12, 13-year-old kid. First thing he said is, Rich, it's not the machinery that makes this factory great. You see, because I was fascinated by machinery. They were making these eyeglass frames, plastic extrusion machines and gold plating, metal plating machines. I was fascinated by the machines, and my dad said, Rich, it's not the machines that make this factory great. It's the knowledge, the creativity, and the intelligence of the Hispanic, Latino, African American, Italian American, German American, Jewish American, Polish American, you go down the list, people who work here. Rich, they might only have a 7th grade education like me, but they don't use a different word. Don't screw up the factory like those damn MBAs and engineers. Their knowledge is intelligence as anyone. They don't have a formal degree. Who cares? It's their knowledge, it's intelligence of these simple people that make this factory great. Their ability to change the machines, tweak the machines, to innovate on the job floor. Now, when I was a professor, I studied this. In all the great manufacturing companies in the world, this is what the CEO would tell you. It's the engagement of the manufacturing workers. It's use of their knowledge and intelligence that makes for a cutting-edge company. The knowledge workers of Silicon Valley, who harness the knowledge of the worker. It's the most important research in the world shows when you pay people in service jobs, in retail jobs, in hospitality jobs, in tourism jobs more, they're more engaged in their work, turnover goes down, their work ethic goes up, they're more engaged in their work, they provide more customer service, they're engaged in business improvement, and the productivity and profits of the company rise. Look, well, this is South Florida. I'm a professor, which means I come from the Fidel Castro School of Public Speaking, which means I could keep you here all afternoon. But I think you've got enough of my sense of what we need to do. We have a great thing going here. We're one of the fastest growing places on the planet. We got a booming innovation and startup economy. We've got great universities. We've got a spectacular airport, spectacular ports that give us all the advantages in the world. But we're a community that's dividing economically and geographically. And it's time for us not only to wake up to this, but to develop strategies and programs and policies and initiatives. And it's going to take time. We're not going to do it overnight. To not only help heal our region and make it more inclusive, the topic of today's conversation, but to hopefully make us stand out among all of American regions as an example of a place that can create a better life for all Americans. Thanks for your patience in listening to me. I'm happy to take questions.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Florida. On behalf of the mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. It's a pleasure spending time with you. Thank you.
And